Today, we're going to be talking about the forgotten gold mine and how you're going to be able to leverage the hidden data within Jamf Pro. So I am really excited to welcome to the stage Aaron and Paul, who are going to take you through this awesome presentation. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Jim. So yeah, we're here today to talk about data and how to look at it and how to visualize it and what you can do with it and a couple of other things around the API built into Jamf. So yes, that's me and Aaron. Good, bona fides established. So data. I love data, but it's got to be good data. And I promise that's the only visual pun included in this presentation, except for this one. Good data, very important. So your Jamf environment contains a great deal of information you're just not seeing. Because well, you can see it, and you can go and you can export it manually. And this new reporting functionality in advanced searches, well, that's fantastic and kind of scuttles a little bit of what I was going to do today. But never mind. That is some really cool access to information and analytics. But what about heuristics? How do we get that information seen in a day-to-day environment? How do we take that data and how do we put it in front of people's places so they can act on it? You know, an email reported CSV is wonderful, but how do you visualize that in a way where people can see problems or issues that are coming down the pipe? So I'm sure the vast majority of you have at least looked at the API. Now, today I'm going to be talking mostly about the classic, in fact, I think entirely about the classic API. You probably are aware there's two APIs. The classic is more feature complete at the moment, in my opinion, so that's what I'm going to be focusing on. So this is just a quick example of the kind of interface you see in the Jamf API console, which is a wonderful playground for exploring the API and what you can do with it. This is a simple one where I'm simply querying for information about a computer's name. So the computer's name is Anne Hume, a lovely lady who works at my university. And if I activate that command, I get JSON, some nice consumable, easily computed, easily manipulated data coming back. So that's wonderful. That's playing around in the sandbox. But why are we doing that? Well, we want to take all this data and we want to use it in different places. We want to visualize it on dashboards, on big screens. But we also want to connect other devices to that data. So there's all kinds of wonderful Internet of Things applications that can be activated around taking that data from Jamf and moving it out into other systems and other areas around your organization. So here's a quick example. This is a field I'm very interested in. When did a device last complete its inventory update? You know, I want to know that my fleet of devices are constantly talking to my Jamf environment and there's no barriers between my devices and Jamf. Or there isn't a significant portion of my machines that aren't updating. So I want to take that field and I can create a simple smart group around it. We can all do this. And there's 562 devices that have successfully completed inventory in the last 24 hours. But then I can take that data and I can grab it from within the API. So I can look it up manually by going to Jamf, or I can use the API to get that same information. So I look up a computer group. The computer group's name has successfully been inventoried in the last 24 hours. And again, what comes back? A nice JSON list of all the devices that have completed that process. Now that list is comprised of the MAC address, the serial number, and the name of the device, and its primary identifier within the Jamf database. However, we probably want a bit more information about that kind of device, so we can maybe extrapolate a little bit of information about why it didn't successfully, it did achieve inventory, whereas another device didn't. So there's two ways to do that, really, advanced searches and smart groups. Now, an advanced search, when you query it with the API, will get you different data. You see, when you create an advanced search, you're also selecting criteria. You saw that this morning in the keynote. And that criteria, any that you select, including extension attributes that you define yourself, will automatically come back in that JSON feed when you query an advanced search. So an example of an advanced computer search, I'm looking for a piece of software called Kaitiaki that's not installed. I want a list of machines that don't have it. So I have created a smart group, an advanced search around that. And what gets returned to me is not just the MAC address, the serial number, the name, and the primary identifier, but all the criteria that I had indicated that I wanted to know about that particular device or devices. Whereas with the smart group, I might just want, say, a list of devices which don't have Druva InSync installed. So I would create that smart group, or I could just do a computer application search. Pretty much any other API search beyond an advanced search is going to return just a list of devices. Now, you can get more explicit than that, and you can do some queries around that data. But really, it's just easier to know the difference between an advanced search and a smart group within Jamf, and that will get you your data faster without a lot of manipulating it. Now, visualizing data is one of my favorite things. I love applying heuristics to data and then trying to find a way to showcase it. So this is an example of a dashboard that's built in the dashing framework, and Aaron is going to show you the augmented version of this in a little bit. But I love this framework. Dashing and smashing are absolutely fantastic ways to visualize data, so easy to use. What I've done here is I've just broken up, this is a screen in my office. It's just a breakup of all the different Macs that we have, what operating systems they're running. It gets updated once every 24 hours, so it's a pretty good reflection of what our fleet's looking like. I can see one of our lab machines hasn't reported in the last 24 hours, so we need to do something about that. I also know that one of our staff machines has had a kernel panic recently. So usually I want to follow that up and make sure it's not a hardware issue. You can also use the API for things like computer availability. So this is some signage that we have in our labs and that show students when they walk in which areas are the most populated. So you can see in L2 there's 11 computers free, good place to go. In L4 it's cram-packed. Now this is a rather poor visualization of all of the devices that a particular staff member of mine who's responsible for that have not successfully completed their backup in the last, say, 72 hours. We use Druva InSync for all automated backups. I initially tried this just as a, hey, just FYI, everyone needs to have this dashboard close to your desk so you can see, which machines of yours haven't backed up that needs a bit of proactive adjustment. It didn't work. People ignored it because it's just a horrible way to visualize data. So I changed it to this. And everyone wants that to be a 0, right? So this is another nice visualization. It's a bit tricky to see on the screen, but basically we're using a user extension and a location helper binary to get latitude and longitude information from all of our Macs, which we then visualize on a map of New Zealand. So any machines that are out of town, out of the university campus, will be visualized on this map. We can expand it out to the whole globe so we can get some really interesting visualizations of where our devices are, all through the API. So let's have a look at getting some data out of the API. Now, I hate talking over the top of recorded videos because I can't remember why I paused at that point to give myself some room to talk about what. So if you hear a pregnant pause, I'm not being suspenseful, I've just forgotten. So this is what if you haven't seen it before, this is what the classic API sandbox looks like. There's a great many search topics and types in there, and each one can be expanded out and you can explore it and look at the different applications around it. There's some Jamf have done a fantastic job of putting all kinds of information around the search and how you might want to use it or what it might be used for. And the fact that you can just log in here and just start whacking data into fields is fantastic. So in this one, I'm simply looking for a particular application, Keynote in this case. I want to know how many computers have got Keynote installed. But I don't just want to spit that back in a JSON file on the screen. I want to do this in the command line. So what I'm doing is I'm using a little bit of functionality in Chrome. Whoa, that's not me. I'm using a little bit of functionality in Chrome to grab the URL to this API call, and then I can automatically turn that into a curl extension. So curl is a great way to download data in the command line. So just in Chrome, I've expanded out the developer tools, I've grabbed the curl extension, I've pasted it straight in, so I didn't have to do anything at all except copy and paste that out, and there's my JSON data, right back. So you can use the Chrome developer extensions to grab that curl URL and paste that straight into a command line. So if you know anything about Bash scripting or Apple script scripting, that's how easy it is to get a JSON file out of your environment. And then of course I can, yeah, they can see it, Paul. I didn't need to do that. All right. So once you've got that data, you want to convert it into something that's a bit more useful. No one wants a JSON file emailed to them, right? That is not going to impress your manager if that's your report for the month. Hey, here's the list. But what you can do is you can take an environment well, any spreadsheet environment can do this, but I like Google Sheets because it, like Jamf, is online. So I can use Google Sheet to engage directly with the API without a middleman. So as an example of that, I'll just go into my computer groups area of my API console, and I'm going to grab out again a list of Adobe Flash. Ugh. Let's hope that's not long. And you can see here I've got a bunch of responses. XML is present, of course, as well, but I like JSON. So I'm just going to grab that little piece of the URL, the trailing end of it. I'm going to flick over to a spreadsheet I prepared earlier. Now what I've done is I've got a blank spreadsheet here, but behind the scenes there's a piece of Google Apps script. Now if you haven't played with that before, it's a wonderful JavaScript-like environment where you can add functionality. It's a bit like an Excel macro or VB script you add in, except much better. So what I'm doing is I've got in my script, I've got a way to query JSON from an API, just a little bit of a function that I wrote. And it can also use basic authentication. So I've got a resource account, and I've already changed the password on that. So feel free to write it down and have a crack. So all I've done is I've pasted in that URL. I'm setting a time-based trigger. So this script is going to run all the time in the background, say once every 10 minutes. All right, that was easy. So I just go back to my spreadsheet, and now I paste in the function that I'm attempting to run into the top cell. And I want to populate the whole script. And just like that, now I've got all that JSON data being loaded into my Google Sheet. So once I've got that, then I've got all kinds of wonderful ways I can take that data and apply a heuristic to it to actually make it human comprehensible. So moving on. So let's do that again. Only this time we're going to try and actually do something with the data. So once again, I'm going to go into my Google Apps script environment. And this time I'm going to look at, I'm not doing it in advanced, sorry, I am doing an advanced search. See, I can't remember. Go faster, Paul. So I'm looking at the moment at a list of what I want is a visualization of a particular VLAN in the university of which devices are plugged into which areas. So I've got 4 of these Google Sheets, each one responsible for giving me inventory of a particular VLAN in our university. And you can see I'm using an advanced search, which has returned a great deal more information than just a smart group search. So once I've got all that information, what do I do with it? Well, I like this tool called Google Data Studio. For quick and dirty visualizations on online sources, there's nothing better. It's easy to use. It'll talk to pretty much any data source. You can also create data source plugins, although there's a big community around it. It's nowhere near as beautiful as dashing or smashing in terms of what you can do around how you depict that data, but you can use it as a panel within your dashing environment. So you can see all I'm doing is just adding one of my Jamf data sources, which is a Google Sheet, which is talking directly to the API. And there it is. I've got 50 devices on that VLAN. And Erin's going to talk a bit about smashing now.
So usually when I go on site to work with other customers, I see a lot of TVs all over the place. And most people use the TVs for that sort of welcome screen. That's letting them know, hey, welcome to our office, or here's all the things that you'll need to know when you check into our place. But as far as anybody who's working back in the help desk area, welcome isn't all that super useful. So at that point, it's the, what do I need to do? And I hit the wrong button. So at that point, we start thinking, okay, well, what can I actually put up here that's relevant? And by and large, most places I see put up a lot of YouTube videos, which don't get me wrong. I love videos about cats and ducklings that are super best friends. But at the end of the day, it basically boils down to I'm not using that screen for anything. So fortunately, I stand on the shoulders of giants. And those giants lived over in the Mac admin Slack channel. There was somebody in there who mentioned smashing. Now, smashing is a fork of dashing, which was built by the Shopify team. It's a Ruby framework. And the individual who got me started on this was this blog post. So I went to that blog post, and he had shown how you can set up smashing on a Windows server and how to just feed that data in via the API. I took a little bit of time. And essentially, what you can do is take all of those advanced searches, those smart groups, and then be able to feed them into jobs inside of smashing. So jobs are essentially Ruby scripts. And here I've copy-pasted one. So I'm just looking at a computer smart group. I've determined which smart group I'm going to look at. I've got a YAML file that I'm referencing to pull back all of that data as to which group I want to reference. Just update a couple of things, and I give it a brand new reference for whatever widget I want to feed that data into. This ERB file is where I'm putting in a brand new widget that's going to reference that new piece of API call. I save that. I save my job file. Then I stop smashing, and then I reload smashing so that it picks up that brand new job file and does that job call. Jobs can run at any sort of scheduled time frame that you want. You can go as little as 5 seconds, 2 minutes, hours. So once it's finished loading and it's got everything up and going, I just refresh this page. And essentially anything that can host any sort of web page can show a dashboard.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah. I really want to fiddle with the cable, see if I can fix that flicker, but I'm sure I'd just make it worse. So, webhooks. They are fantastic. I love them. And they are the way you can achieve that kind of interaction between disparate objects like the Internet of Things device. You're trying to get your Ring doorbell to talk to your Jamf environment for some damn reason. How am I going to do that? Well, webhooks are the way to do it. If you've never played around with webhooks before, spend some time. They are very, very powerful. And they're not just unique to Jamf. It's a concept that's starting to find itself in every cloud-based environment. So a quick example of creating a webhook. I'm going to create a very simple one here. So I've gone into my Jamf environment, I've gone to the webhook area, and I've created a new one. And all I want this webhook to do is update the Slack channel that I follow every time someone in my organization enrolls a new device. So all that means is I'm just going to get told every time a new device arrives in our environment. I want to make sure naming conventions are being followed. I want to know that, someone's just enrolled 10 devices from the Faculty of Science. I better make sure they know what they're doing. So I set up my webhook, and all I've done is I've set it to activate on mobile device enrolled, and I want the data to be delivered to be JSON. So in my Slack environment, I've got a wee plugin that will accept a JSON feed. So whenever I then enroll a device into my environment, or anyone else does, that will trigger the webhook. So webhooks, once you've developed it, you establish the trigger that will fire it off, and then that webhook will go away and talk to some other service, like in this instance Slack, and produce that result. Here's another example of doing something with webhooks. I love iBeacons and Eddystone devices. I think they're cool. If you don't, just wait 5 years. They're going to be everywhere. So imagine you've got a classroom environment full of valuable Macs. And someone walking past notices that they're unsecured and makes off with them. Now, this is very hypothetical. I'm not sure this would be a good approach to managing risk, but it's also fun. So in that room, we have an iBeacon, and the iBeacon is constantly broadcasting. And when those Macs no longer see that they are talking to that iBeacon, that triggers an iBeacon state change event, which you can use to trigger a webhook. So we've got our iBeacon state change. We then have a couple of triggered events, because when that iBeacon state change event goes off, then those Macs are moved into a smart group automatically, which then triggers some webhooks based around those two new enrollments, which fires off, say, 3 different webhooks, or 2 or 1, depending on your use case. These are just simple PHP scripts that I've written. They're not at all complicated. So once I've got those, oops, have I gone too far? Nope. Looking at too many screens here. So the first webhook can send an email to people saying, hey, it looks like these Macs may have left the room, post in a Slack channel, call Google Duplex and get them to ring everyone up. You can also use the API itself. So the API can trigger a webhook, which then triggers the API. Now, the API in Jamf is not just about getting data. There's also all kinds of wonderful functions you can trigger on your fleet via the API. So you can create smart groups via the API. You can perform management actions via the API. Some of those management actions are very difficult to trigger without using the API, like the ability to you've seen the Manage Actions option in Jamf. There's a whole lot of cool functionality in there. Those can also be activated by the API, including things like turning on lost mode, erasing the device, and even doing things like changing the iPad's wallpaper or color scheme. You can update the digital signage around your campus. Alert, alert, there's a burglary in progress. And of course, anyone who turns on the iPad gets a new desktop background. And I'm sorry, I said there'd be no more puns, but there you go. So periodic visualization, I think, is very important. It's not enough that you just got a screen that showed once a day, gets reloaded, and there's your data. It's got to be constant, right? It's got to be real time. So this is a bit outside the box, but it's kind of fun. So basically, we're going back to Google Sheets, and we're going to have a look at how we can get information and then respond to it proactively via our digital signage. So in my office, I've got a big touch screen. It's about 50 inches. It's just a standard keyboard and mouse touchscreen plugged into a little Mac Mini. So I'm creating here a list of machines which have got a user extension called Core Location added. So we've got a relocation helper on all our Macs loading that latitude and longitude we saw before. I want to take that data and I want to make it even more explicit about where a particular device is, and I also want to have a bit of API functionality around it. So I go back into Google Apps Script here, and I've got a little bit of extra functionality in this, where I'm talking to a blank slideshow. So I've got the URL to that blank Google slideshow there. And if you think I spend too much time with Google products, you're probably right. All I'm doing is saying, if the JSON report of all my computers contains a latitude and a longitude, then I want that visualized on some rotating signage. So I go in and just like before, I paste in the little command that's going to trigger the action. Of course, I could create a time-based trigger as well. This is just a quick way to get data into the sheet. So there I have a list of all the devices that are out of town again. But I want to visualize that data, right? So just having a list like that, no one's going to respond to it. So I've got my blank slideshow. I have no idea why it took so long to do this. Apparently, I thought I was going to be more verbose than I am. So after that loads, I just go back to the slideshow eventually. There we go. Yes, I can do it. So behind the scenes, that Google Apps Script is running. And it's going through all of the return results, and it's going away to Google, and it's building a Google map showing the location of each place using that lat long value. And then I've got a slideshow which I can visualize on my touch screen, which is just a rotating list of all the devices, where they are. Even that little flag in the top right corner there will change based on the country you're in. But the cool thing about it is there's also webhooks there. So I can touch on the screen, update machine time zone. Or I can touch on the screen, enable 1 hour of admin access for someone who's off campus. Right? So if I see that someone's in Australia, their time zone needs to be updated, I can just tap that, fires off an API call via a webhook to Jamf, which then sends that command to their computer. Right? Easy peasy. And that's constantly running in my office, and if nothing else, it's a fun talking point. So a little bit of advice around how you might want to design the look and feel of your dashboards. So Miller's Law states that people are dumb. You know, we all have the memory of goldfish. You can't keep a lot of information in your head, which is why this is such a dumb idea. You don't want to do this. Instead, you want your visualization to be something more like this. Take the data, compress it as much as you can, and then give it to people in small amounts so they can, when you're looking at your visualization, you can see the information which is most pertinent to you. Another bit of advice, oops, let me go back here. The law of Prägnanz, I think that's how you pronounce it, states that you can't take in a lot of complex information and apply your own general heuristic to it in any kind of meaningful sense. So this, as a visualization of our network structure, is not good. You do not want a list like this. When you return data, make it something that people are going to go, oh, that's interesting, not, oh my God, I have to read that. Instead, this kind of approach is good, where you're taking that data and you're visualizing it in a more human comprehensible fashion. And well, I think we're done. I thought we were going to go long, but apparently not. I talked too fast. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Paul and Aaron. Really appreciate the phenomenal presentation. I am a big fan of all the memes, by the way. So we do have until 2:15 today, so we have a little bit of time for Q&A. If there are questions for either Aaron or Paul, I'll invite anyone to step up to the mics we have on both of the main rows here, and we'll kind of cycle through as we can, wrapping up right at 2:15.
First of all of that was really good, and I appreciate that most of it seemed either open source or free or affordable. Yeah. So the first question that I really have is, all of those Google scripts, are those available publicly, or is it stuff that you've done on your own and has to kind of be kept private, like if it's proprietary to your organization?
It's stuff that I've done on my own, which I'm happy to share. So if anyone's interested in it, I'll just literally share the spreadsheet with you.
Yeah.
After I delete a couple of passwords out of it.
Sure. Change a couple of links.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Oh, okay.
If we don't have any more questions, I just want to thank each and every one of you for joining us for this session today. You can feel free to head on down to the expo hall or mingle in the hallways. We, again, just really appreciate the time. Maybe one more round of applause for our amazing presenters today.
Thank you.